anthropomorphic tendencies in unknown spaces. In today's episode, I would like to dive into something that the human being has been doing since a long time. This concept of anthropomorphism, the word comes from anthropos, which means human in Latin, and morphos, which means form. And pretty much it's the idea of giving human form to an object, to a subject, to even the concept of God. And in the 1700s, this was the concept of anthropomorphism. You can kind of say like it was found in heresy when people gave human qualities to God, the creator of the universe. And that was a kind of, you can say, crime. You know, pretty much as civilizations have risen and fallen, when a civilization rises, it is also based on certain internal foundations, internal ideas. If those inner ideas get challenged by nature, the civilization needs to protect its pillars. You know, imagine a building protecting its pillars that are keeping it. But it doesn't mean it's the right thing. It just means some parts. When you kind of look at history, you see that what took place was what there couldn't have been any other. Like that was the best our ancestors could do, or the best that nature kind of allowed them. Now, I kind of thought of this idea as very crucial because I often speak about the inner realms. Pretty much I see every moment, every human being can even see it for themselves. Your moment has an objective component. I call this the objective realm, how the self appears as an object and the world also appears as a giant object we're on. Then you can say there's the subjective realm, the subjective component to your moment. Right now, these words that I'm saying, they have subjective existential value. If I don't say them, if I never said it, it'd be just stillness, you know? It would be like silence never changed. And by the way, to anybody who's listening, due to the nature of these being a live stream, and because I'm not a machine, there may be gaps in the middle, so I recommend, if it's not your cup of tea, you can hear something else. But if sometimes this Shiro Munamarshi has this quote, he says, silence is also conversation. Sometimes when a person hears something, the silence also gives an opportunity for the ripples on the pond to settle. For me, it's like silence is very crucial to inner piloting. That means if you as a human being aren't comfortable with silence and stillness, your inner realms, you're going to constantly humanize, anthropomorphize your subjective realms, and you're going to get attached to it. And that's what we find to some degree in the New Age community. You know, in the sense that it's as if certain subjects have, the being has had a unique relationship with certain subjects, and now those subjects are beginning to be seen through a human reflection. This is a very important idea because what it means is when you look in the mirror, you're actually looking at an object. So an object is looking at itself in the mirror and it's seeing itself. But then the awareness to that sight is not objective. It's subjective and beyond. There's more than our imagination going on. You know, imagination is not the end of creativity. Imagination is a liftoff platform. And lift off to where, you may ask? I would say it's a lift off. It lift off into, in some sense, a sort of unknown, unconscious collective rhythm. It finds you. What I mean by that is like when you, it's kind of like your antenna. Right now, who you think you are, you can actually say kinda, it's like an antenna of what you accept as meaningful. If I think I'm a tough guy right now, it's as if like I wouldn't tolerate soft words, If I think I'm a soft person, I wouldn't tolerate rough words. Do you know what I mean? But I've kind of noticed that what is this costume game of ideology every day? Every day I wake up, I'm a new self. Eventually I realize that it's like the content of the mind is changing. If I identify with it, then I gotta change all the time. It's too much work. It's like they asked the sage, how did you get enlightened? And the sage was like, nothing, man. It was just too much work. So I just realized and of course I'm being playful. I mean, it's not as lightly as I'm saying. Oftentimes, great transformation must make you aware of the edges of the spectrum. So what that means is sometimes with that moment where the pilot is lifting off from the current state of mind into a trust, into a rhythm, uh, you can say that moment is a moment of the inseparability of self and world as one movement. That's where I'm getting to. That it's as if, like, here's the thing, all, and no human being is excluded from this, all human beings, pretty much it's as if you learn an alphabet and then you just start trying to, your mind is constantly fathoming combinations. So the same way back in the day they took sticks and stones and somehow made fire, similarly the mind is in some sense constantly taking sensory perception and building itself with it. Now this tendency to constantly humanize things is very important because there is a chance that what is artificial is not, is, how can I say it? Pretty much I think this is what happens. A human being is conditioned into a life with a certain definition. Pretty much all human beings, when they wonder about life, I think they start off as a character in a story wondering about life. Most people, I find, don't see more than their inner realms because their desires is the top of their list priority. What that means is when you go after something you want, then it's only like one person wins. But when you go after something that the collective effort of 8 billion creatures on a rock wants, then it becomes bigger. Do you know? Then it's like the light in the room is shared with more eyes. To continue, as the human mind enters a new space, it tends to define the space. Our sense of self is defined by how we interpret the world, and how we interpret the world is how the world enters our eyes. That means our free will is dependent on the world being there first. And the world is not listening to the free will. The free will, we can say, is an emergent property of the cosmic will. When I speak about will, I don't mean a person named Will. Free will, guys. What I mean is that when life is acknowledged as a process, you see, you're either seeing it as known particles or unknown particles, or you're seeing it as a known process or an unknown process. In these talks, I'm saying at some point life becomes an unknown process, all the way that the known particles and the known process is kept changes. Right? So eventually what happens is that man is going to find himself in a new space where if he doesn't have a way to approach that new space, he has to let the past define it. When the past defines it, that's how giving up happens. When any moment a person is given up, I'm pretty sure every person at some point in their life, they've not given up on everything, but just like they've stopped an effort. Now, what happens there is that really the past is declaring the value of the present, but the past doesn't know the value, it's just an image. So when you suddenly realize your mind is juggling imagery, you know, and what is juggling the mind is nature, there's a very profound realization that our species, it has drawn itself in the void. And that's where the anthropomorphic tendency arises. It's not just out in our inner realms. It's not just in our outer realms. You know, it's not like a person, what was idol worship? Like a person saw a chair and was like, and a light beam hit that chair or something. And the person was like, whoa, this chair is God. This chair is truth. Do you know what I mean? Or this chair is the ultimate human or something. There was some sort of ultimate value given to an object, and eventually the owner of the chair came and it's like, yo guys, I need my chair back. What are you guys doing all worshiping this chair? You know? What can I say? As we explore new territory, we tend to want to bring something back to the tribe. When we want to bring back something to the tribe, we automatically humanize. What that means is direct experience is constantly being translated into indirect language because direct experience comes and goes. How fascinating is that? It's as if, like, right now, I remember when I was 10 years old, my grandfather passed away and I was visiting Iran for the summer. And when my grandpa passed away, I hadn't seen him. I had kind of lived in Canada. And it was a moment where I realized this person now exists in my memories, as if like a direct experience lingers as an indirect language, linguistic translation or image. right? So what does that mean? That means direct experience is echoing as an image that remains in the conscious being. That means you can open a room, see something, remember that, you know, and the next time, you're looking for something, you suddenly see it, the image is there. So what that means is man is not just living it, we're not just an object moving on the world. We're an object that experiences other objects as subjective images, and these subjective images can linger, you know? So what that means is it's kind of like if the human brain was seen as a mechanism, we can say it is receiving, it's expressing, and it's also storing, or another word for it would be processing. So I feel it's kind of strange because there is too much of a resemblance. When I heard the concept of a fractal, it was an overwhelming moment. I mean, of course, I had envisioned infinity in various ways before that word, but it was a sort of, that word had an implication, philosophical implication that was very heavy. And it was this implication that if, as Plato had said, as above, so below, that means the patterns we see in our day-to-day lives on some level are also macrocosmically happening. That means right now, as I kind of say these words, perhaps the way these sounds are being projected, it's similar to how a galaxy is moving or something. I'm just saying, like it's the micro and the macro having a sort of equal pattern, but not equal shape. It's strange. It's strange. It's as if they both have design. They are part of the same design, but they are different dimensions. It's like when you open a fruit. A fruit is a multidimensional experience, guys. Because the fruit has a dimension that is hiding what is within it. And so when we kind of look at intelligence, I find it has a multidimensionality. Sometimes that multidimensionality could be just a shield that it has kept up. It has kept up a dimension to shield itself from the chaotic acknowledgement of the unknown, or the voidness of the unknown, because that's a level of human psychology which I'm still constantly thinking about how it should be properly introduced. And it's very hard because on some level we have to discuss it as a global community of philosophers, with the inspiration of School of Athens 2.0, which is a global community. The whole idea is that in order to feel alive, we realize we must express. And that is what survival is. Survival is the effort to move. And that's the cool thing about this life, that we are not trees. We're human beings. We are not rooted in the earth. We have a relationship with the earth because we're separate from it. And this separation means, if you really think about it, trees can't build spaceships. So, so if trees can't build spaceships, it's one of those things where it's like suddenly the fingers of man had an inbuilt divinity. The feet of man had inbuilt design. So because this life has too much design, and the overwhelming factor about the idea of the fractal is that I remember I was walking in a park and I saw a squirrel from the branches of a tree jump into the branches of another tree, but the squirrel did it so smoothly and fast. For a second, it was like similar to how I had seen images of a neuron synapse. Do you know what I mean? It was like neurons moving from different branches in the brain. It was like a similar thing where I suddenly thought, oh my God, could neurons actually be living beings? Right? Now I thought that. So as I was kind of looking at that, then I suddenly wondered if I remember I was in Mozzate, Italy. No, sorry, not Mozzate, Genazzano in Italy, right, when this idea came to me. And I've given a talk on it. I think the talk was called Advancements in Philosophical Investigation, something like that. Anyways, in that talk, I kind of got like this very profound point of view where I wondered, just like this is pretty much the you can say the philosopher's inbuilt freedom to wonder, where what it is that I wondered, what if the cells, like what if the red blood cells in my veins suddenly became conscious and suddenly created a language and they started interpreting as much as we can with their own language and science and mathematics and technology, and then they would still see that they would have no idea why the human being is going to work tomorrow. So you see, there is an unfathomability. And so I thought, what if the same way there is karma, the same way there is white blood cells released? Because I noticed something about good and evil. They fear each other, but they can't live without one another. They can't be defined without one another. So the morality is honestly such a complex um, design to wonder about, because it's kind of like you can't really know what's bad without the good, and you can't know what's good without the bad. And if society is a normality that is changing by every generation's update in behavior and action and decision and vision, so eventually it becomes something where good and bad is just fingers being pointed, majority of fingers being pointed. So for me, I feel that the civilization is eventually lifting itself up, evolving beyond old school morality into a simple vision. And I call this the, how would I say it? It's like just efficient vision is the greatest success. When human beings realize that regardless of what you tell yourself, what story you're harboring in your attention, every moment there is an efficient movement that's possible and an inefficient. And the explanation and the reasoning of why, like you may be in an inefficient moment, like that child in Africa in that poverty commercial is in an inefficient position. Okay, but and that child may say, "Mr. Within, what do you mean there's an efficient vision? I'm dying here." And I would be like, "Let me tell you what I mean." Child in poverty commercial. The thing is, guys, there is many tragic things going on this planet. It is not that I am going to have my attention on tragedy and give my attention to tragedy first. You see, tragedy is possible. Everything can stop. Literally, like ancient books talk about the world ending. What does that mean? That means the world could die. Sorry for the gaps in the talks, guys. I really, because these are live, um, I can't really do much. I mean, or my earlier episodes, like I tended to record it first, edit the pauses, and then share it. But for me, it's like at a certain pace. So imagine someone writing. When their hand gets tired, they gotta just stop for a little bit, you know? But anyways, to continue. There has been many moments in my life where the inner realms have moved quicker than the outer realms, and many moments where the outer realms moved quicker than the inner realms. In an emergency of the outer realm, for example, when I had an experience in Iran in my cottage in Karaj, where in that place, how can I tell you, there was an earthquake. Literally, there were these kind of railings in the house beside the stairs, and these railings started to shake. And the house was actually shaking, and everybody was experiencing it. And I remember at that time, well, we were all the cousins, all my cousins and my brother and my friends, like we were all upstairs playing some sort of kind of like like group pillow fight, you know, uh, war. And I remember when this thing happened, this earthquake. I kind of like in Canada, that kind we had kind of trained playfully in one class to go behind the table, underneath the table. And I remember I went underneath this billiard table, and then I noticed the billiard table was plastic and it could just fall. So I remember I kind of like just leave the building. That was the very casually. I'm like, this is ridiculous, this protocol. Just leave the building. And so I remember that was kind of external emergency, and it was very funny because my grandpa was playing backgammon with this guy, and the guy thought my grandpa's knee was shaking the table, but it was actually like an earthquake. And yeah, just remember that. But so an external emergency really snaps you out of your inner realms. You could be fantasizing about anything, but when the earth is shaking, you're like, okay. You instantly snap out of your fantasy. I've even noticed this, guys. This is why I'm saying the way we're defining sanity and insanity in modern society has to be restudied, and I don't know how it's going to revolve, because I think there's always another angle to things, and that's kind of what history proves, that as time moves on, just like the crystallization of manifestation it kind of amplifies. Similarly, man's sophistication of interpretation amplifies. So it's as if our knowledge is a blade, it's getting sharper as time is going forth. Now, the sharpness of our precision to identify and to classify things. Ultimately, when a creature wakes up, you're working either with your inner realms or your outer realms. And if you think you are both, if you think you are your inner realms, you'll get defined. You solidify. If you think you're your outer realms, you solidify. Very easy. Wherever your attention remains, you are that. You know? I believe this was in Plato's even allegory of the cave, that it was like a bunch of people born in a cave, and they can't move. Imagine this was in Plato's allegories. Well, important idea to know in philosophy, that Plato was like, these people, imagine they never got to saw themselves, and they were in a cave and they only saw shadows on the wall. And so these people who saw shadows on the wall, they thought they were the shadows on the wall. What could they do? They could see nothing else other than the shadows on the wall. But now, imagine one of these, as Plato says, and one of them gets out and suddenly sees the whole world, the whole dimensional framework is different. And so that has been the kind of thing, because when you really look at it, what can philosophers speak about? I mean, when you look at life, there's space and there's stuff. There's stuff in space, okay? And all ideologies are either going towards infinity or going towards emptiness. Where else are they going? And they're changing in the middle. We have to find a way, and I don't know what it is, but I constantly feel, every time I give these talks, I feel that it's a collective effort. It's not a one-man thing. It's like literally the species is becoming sensitive to how it has to become a student of its own intelligence. And that means beginning by not trying to own the intelligence. You see, if you think you're just atoms, you'll be like, yeah, it's my free will. I can move this object wherever I want. But when it comes to subjects, I'm telling you, it's as if I have a relationship with thought that, believe it or not, just like in nature, I don't feel superior. There's no superiority over something when there is a sort of decency abided prior. And I found this out in nature, because I've had many profound experiences in nature, and one that was very profound was how stuff happens without explanation. That's nature. Language came after. Nature was here, just happening. So this could totally imply that in the reverse engineering of towards the origins of history, we are coming to a state of mind undefinable. So what does that mean? As if the world, the game, if this world was a simulation, video game, holographic simulation, it would be one where when we attempted to see beyond the design, we saw we couldn't. And that's the thing. That's why so many mystics thought life was a dream, because they looked at history and they're like, I don't know the beginning of this and I don't know the end of this. Okay, life is a dream. Now, when you look at, I remember there was a time where I was kind of really looking into the New Age community, and in the Mount Shasta area, in I believe in California or Arizona, somewhere there, there are people who feel they are communicating with extraterrestrials. And that's the thing, that's the challenge that every philosopher has ever wondered about. That where do we draw the line of what is reality and what is imagination, and what is reality's extension into imagination? Do you know? Because when you really look at it, we are, the human being psychology kind of is like, works like sentence structure on an empty page. That means there's gaps between the words. So how I experience myself, guys, it's not like one continuous character, all the time. It's like every breath, every blink, every moment that I just pause for a second. It's like the mind, the pond, surface of the pond settles, and suddenly a new movement of attention arises. Because without contentment, you can't see what's in the box of the world that you have made. That means that I think the first challenge towards, or let me say, Rumi kind of settled it very well. He said, your task is not to seek love, to seek after love. Your task is to get rid of all the barriers you have made against it. You know what that means? That means you're not here to chase truth. You're here to see what has come in the way as a resistance towards the truth. That means, what if the truth was here before you? And then the only way to find it was to do nothing. And could that be the grand inspiration of the Tao or the Logos, or all these sort of collective rhythms that we feel we abide in our inaction? In 2013, I had this Tibetan Buddhist beads around my neck, and I was actually living as a Tibetan Buddhist. Like with a full dedication to the ideology, as if like I saw something real through it, And I remember I had an interest of the metaphysical that was kind of like, you could say, sometimes preferenceless, sometimes, all right, let's see what it is, kind of mentality. And I remember there was a thing where I had found this pendulum, and I had kind of held that pendulum, and I was like, and this was, by the way, I considered this was ignorance at the time, what I was doing, but I'll explain to you why. So I had this pendulum in my hand, and I was like, all right, I'm going to ask a question from my own mind, and I'm going to get an answer from something else. Okay? And so, emotionally, not emotionally, like presence-wise, literally, I can't say emotionally, actually. Like, it was as if I held that pendulum, and just by the moment, my attention, like literally an antenna, like a that kind of thing, antenna of an old school radio. You have to adjust it. It was like the moment I thought there was the kind of intent to communicate with something else, the subjective realm projected it. Do you see what I mean? Just by the mere whim of wanting something in a subtle way, your subjective realm start animating. I think there's a sort of hypersensitivity which leads to that hyper self-definition. That means you are defining yourself constantly, but it's not just based on your visual senses. How fascinating is that? That all human beings, regardless of how their intelligence can be measured, have access to dimensions that we can never measure. You know, it's literally, it's like we don't have rulers for. You know, it's like trying to index the whole cosmos even. At that point, you're like, yeah, I think it's a little too big. It's a little too big to kind of put on paper. Many personalities have come and gone. As much as I've seen different shapes in this life, I've seen different people. And I've seen even different nature of people and even how the environment. Because something I consider that I don't know how many people consider, but because I've kind of noticed my mind is being my whole moment, if there is, it's kind of like we cannot ignore how the free will is choosing to be while simultaneously being before it chooses. So it's kind of like free will. I don't want to say it like this because free will is a very foundational idea for the evolution of individual conscious beings. But as we move towards collective consciousness, that means for the first time our inner realms are reducing in significance, and what's increasing in significance is the outer realms. Right now, I think the reason we are a civilization that is so keen upon entertainment because it's boring outside. Do you know? It's boring. It's extremely boring. I don't want to say boring, but it's like it's not as fast as it could be. Do you know? Imagine like your sibling is a fast runner, and then you see them in a race, and they're not going as fast as they could. Do you know? Or it's like a coach that sees a player that is like suddenly found in an insecure position or something. You know. So the same way I kind of looked at it and I'm like, what is this? We're on this planet for a little while and what are we doing? What is the value of our lives going to? And it has gone towards our inner realms, but it hasn't gone towards our inner realms freely, and the barks of dogma can be heard everywhere. Believe it or not, I've even considered, you know how you go into a building, there's walls. When the like similar to that, it's like every room has a sort of acceptance of state of mind. Do you know? And I feel my whole life it has kind of been like entering new moments and then implementing some sort of energetic direction to the moment. Do you know? That means on the simplest level, I'm not even giving a talk, I'm just energy expressing, if I can say that. Anyways, the reason I shared that pendulum story is because I tried that once and it gave me a weird feeling, and then I put it away, and then I was like, okay, what is this? You know, this is me paying too much attention to a rock connected to a string. And then I realized, guys, it's our uncertainty that projects imagination certainty. That means uncertainty in the outer realms is filled by certainty in the inner realms. Uncertainty in the inner realms is filled by certainty in the outer realms. Because it's such a fascinating view. I mean, think about it. It's like you as a human being have been conditioned and to function physically. But what if there's a non-physical component to you? What would that mean? What would that translate as? What does your DNA give you access that you feel others do not? Because how can I tell you? For me, my communication with what I felt was the unknown edge of my own known experience was in some sense through essays. So, and I remember there was this intuitive essay that it was like I would just close my eyes, I would get an emotion, and then that emotion held within it everything, the knowing for how the finger should move, what content should go. So I would just, through an emotion, just write, and I remember in one of those writings, there was something about first of all, acknowledging that this space-time continuum, there's multiple rooms, and the second thing, not being attached to a personality because it can keep you in a room. That means if you think you're like on some sort of prison planet of unknown aliens or something, do you know that's your attention is on that? You're the walls of your subjective of your inner realms are limited by that. So for me, it was kind of like thinking like, wow, the whole world is acknowledging itself as a thought, as a body that is controlled by a thought of self. But then it's like, how can a thought control a body? How can just mere movement of neuron, and I don't want to say how, but I want to say like how, you see, it's pretty much the fascination of ontology, how in some sense we come to know that which comes to be known. And what does it mean? Because it feels it has had to be a relationship that, for example, in the scientific endeavor, as mighty and incredible as it is at the same time a sort of philosophical question that if we are constantly cutting up something and naming the particles inside, cutting up and naming, it's as if we are playing an endless game. That means it's as if you can totally look at this life and see everything endlessly going towards being destroyed, or you can see things endlessly going towards being created. There could be a world where it's like people could think instead of people when they get old, they die, it's as if they become eternal, Imagine there was a society that are like, yo, there's no fear of death. We're just eternal beings after this. You know? And so many stories can project many avenues for the psychological vehicle. But wonder. For there are some mysteries that only your eyes can see and only your eyes can engage. The inner realms are a gift. It's just that they become activated when the attention is found. So let me tell you what that means. For example, I remember I would have to drive long hours, from to constantly pick up my brother from Barrie. And I was in Toronto. It was like a 2-hour drive. And so when I would drive, I would eventually reach a point where I would just put a lecture, put something that would keep me thinking, and keep my attention engaged. And then I would kind of like how can I tell you? It's my attention would go into a certainty, and then just by following that certainty, there was full control. So we are way more complex than just a sequence of thoughts being able to define us as beings. We're actually rhythmic abiders. We rhythmically abide with manifestation. And so it's like when a person drives, it's as if like the edges of their car is in their attention. The whole road is in their attention. Sometimes even when I've driven, my mind playfully sees the whole street being geometric. You know? When I say geometric, that means, you see, the imagination is something that we first are making the mistake of separating it from reality. Then the second mistake is, in some sense, not caring for its image. Do you know? And what that means is there's a reason people are drawn more to science fiction than fantasy. Because science fiction is more closer to reality, even though it's much further ahead. It's like saying like this. I think this is a perfect metaphor. Body temperature is a perfect metaphor for belief systems, how they arise. When a person believes only in one image of life, one viewpoint, one portrait painting, snapshot moment, you know, it's as if the person is thinking that their body is only at one temperature, not realizing through their own progress in this space-time continuum, the body experiences various temperatures. So that's similar to saying the body experiences various states of mind. And when you see a substance alter through different temperatures, it changes. Like the particles move quicker when it gets hotter, so it suddenly becomes like steam. The particles move less, it becomes like ice, the substance. And I find it in our psychology, there is a sort of elemental similarity there, that if the person suddenly thinks that what they see in one moment is everything, it's like a leaf is moving in the river, but they only see the leaf. They don't see the river. And that's the great question. Is man moving or the world? Conscious wakefulness is just an exploration zone. That's why I created the idea of advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness. The advanced communicators was my vision that an advanced civilization must have an advanced grasp of its inner technology. And language can be used as a sword and a shield, by the way. What that means, and it can also be used as a laser. But it can be used as what I mean by it can be used as a sword and shield. I've seen, how can I tell you? I've even used language sometimes as an arrow, a bow and an arrow, but it's not karmically rewarding. Every human being must reestablish a new relationship with their own intelligence through a new experience. That's it. You have to find a moment where you can look at everything anew and realize you're authorized, that it's okay. Like, that's why we have conscious minds. There's an advantage to being a small thing in a big world because we don't have to imagine much. A lot of it is here. That means when you close your eyes and imagine like another world, like how another civilization, if there were creatures on Saturn, how would they be living? Or Jupiter? So just like the person imagines that, then they're like, wait a minute, when I open my eyes, I don't have to imagine the world, it's there. So the world is like free imagination. Like free popcorn, like the world is just given, it's there. But man is more defined by the process of life. that it's being. That means if we were comfortable with doing nothing, you know, we would be nothing. And it is man's attention that must constantly be moved, you know. Language can be used as a sword when you have to, from the silence, pierce the veil of thought. That means it's like, for me, when I speak, believe it or not, sometimes it's like the image behind my eyes comes quicker than the words for the image. But because the image comes there, I can always pause and find the right word for it. I feel the world is reverting into a strange surrealism. Reality is becoming surreality. And what I mean by that is that we thought entertainment is to see the deviation of reality. But we will soon realize as a species the greatest entertainment is to look exactly directly at reality. That means, do you want to see like a hand-drawn picture of a lion, or do you want to see an actual lion up close? And when I say up close, that means I'm just saying, like, do you want to have the experience, or do you want to have a symbol attribution of the experience? You see, so this sensitivity to thought, believe it or not, like I feel like when I found a way to design, kind of like speak about it, I think by nature people can kind of see what I mean by this, being aware of the subjective realm. That means, imagine someone comes, person A is walking, okay, and person B comes, and person B has person B's reality. Okay, and person B is functioning with his inner realms. So person B has person B's inner realms, and person A has person A's inner realms. Now, person B from his inner realms comes and says, "Person A, you're this and that, you're this and that," and some messed up stuff. Now person A, if person A gets angry, that means person A's inner realm has been so weak that it instantly believed what that person said. Do you see? So when you get angry, it's as if you've actually cared for what the other person has said. You've considered their inner realms to be important. There's anyways. So person A, if person A is not conscious of their inner realm, their inner realm will instantly get defined by the language projected in that moment to them. But if person A is conscious of his inner realm, suddenly person A realizes person B has no idea what person A's inner realm looks like. So person B is talking out talking in thin air, or talking from person B's inner realm. So when you can notice people have different subjective realms, then communication, you forget about the behavior and emotion part. Just forget about the behavior and emotion part of communication. It becomes about actually listening to how the intelligence of the moment moves. That means sometimes I've wondered that some of the unique things that I've seen in nature, was it because of this sort of internal high regard I had for how everything in the universe is already perfect subconsciously? And I was like, is it because of that? Is it because of some sort of innate positivity? And then I realized, no. It's that sometimes the question evaporates before the answer can be given. And that's the realization that language is I don't know, it's a simulation we all live in. Pretty much reality is in many rooms. That means every moment can be seen multidimensionally, and in every moment of your life, if their attention endures, a new dimension can be added. Novelty can enter any moment. The other thing that came in my writings, in my intuitive writings, was that do not see a face. Do not give a face to the void. And it was this strange kind of, at the beginning in 2013, it was this moment where I got this very profound sort of recognition that the unknown or the divine or the concept of God and spirituality and all this, it is an implication of a movement that is not this. So ultimately, evolution means the past is lived for the future. So this was the thing, because it's very easy. The mind has an ability to infinitely think of faces in the void. The mind has an ability to infinitely fathom worlds. Think about it this way: everything that you know, or every product we see in society, that product, its design was once in some person's mind only, and the design extended out. And so this relationship of the inner realms extending outward, I think the more you trust that, the more a person trusts the creative dimension of their life, the more they will kind of I think it's the healthiest thing the mind can do. Just like when you kind of go to the gym, you take the muscles to failure. And I sometimes feel it's okay for the human mind to very intensely wonder. That intense wonder will eventually be the arrival of a subtle detail being noticed, and that subtle detail can set the whole context into motion. So that means I feel really the standard shouldn't be that it's just the known and the unknown. The model can even, and that means it's not just self and world, it's the unknown self and the known self simultaneously, and the unknown world and the known world simultaneously being the same moment. That means we are being four dimensions simultaneously: an unknown dimension of self, an unknown dimension of self, an unknown dimension of world, and a known dimension of the world. Now, this can even be drawn like an X. Literally, if we were to give this the thing I just said a geometrical shape, it would be like an X. So it would be the intersection of two dualisms. And let me tell you, there's so much in skill. There's a reason back in the day they said skill must be kind of to some degree cultivated in solitude. What does that mean? That means sometimes the most greatest visions that your mind receives is not where it's running towards somewhere to be, where it's trying to be a missing puzzle piece to the world. It's when your mind, how can I tell you, disarms its own conception and stands fearlessly watching. That fearless watching will be the ultimate contentment of the void. That fear dies when you move beyond the language threshold. Literally, it's like there's no character to have fear anymore. It's like the energy is conscious of itself beyond human psychology. This is why in kind of like Mr.Within school of thought, I've kind of walked in halls of the known where I consider that if there is the idea of the soul, it cannot be anthropomorphic. What that means is I don't see a personality to just awareness. For me, it's like a field. The soul is like a unknown field, and we're all the known particles moving in it. Right? So for me, it's like the soul doesn't have a past life or a future life, but the mind, The mind has access to echoing the simple relationships in your environment into macrocosmic, even mythological proportions. What does that mean? That means a person can pour orange juice in a cup and suddenly make that into an origin story where it was as if an unknown hand poured the universe into a container, you know? You know? And imagine the years after people were like, whoa, 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 the cup is in some sense, it's like the space and matter is the orange juice, you know? Like, do you see what I mean? The idea can be suddenly put into a macrocosmic context and it can suddenly instantly evolve through endless angles. But it depends on the requirement of it, as if like there's so many buttons that a pilot can press, an airplane pilot, but the airplane pilot doesn't press all of them at the same time. Do you see? So in conscious navigation, that's the point of it, that our intelligence is meant to be driven, and pun intended, you know, driven both internally and externally. It's like we don't want to just advance the technology, we also want to advance the users of technology. Because if the technology becomes smarter than the users of technology, that means the users of technology have devalued their free will. They have literally kind of dismissed their own free will. I have the Bhagavad Gita right here. Let me open up a random page and see what Rishi Vyasa would say. So, in this lovely book, God is speaking to an archer in the middle of a battlefield. God is saying to this archer named Arjuna, the god is Krishna, he says, and having obtained which he does not reckon any other gain as greater than that, and established in which he is not shaken even by the heaviest of sorrows, that state called yoga, which is free from the contact of sorrow in the form of transmigration, should be known. Nay, this yoga should be resolutely practiced with an unwearied mind, completely renouncing all desires arising from sankalpas, thoughts of worldly desires, in brackets it's saying that's what sankalpas are, and fully restraining all the senses from all sides by the mind. He should through gradual practice attain tranquility, and fixing the mind on God through reason controlled by steadfastness, he should not think of anything else. Drawing back the restless and fidgety mind from all those objects after which it runs, he should repeatedly fix it on God. And think about it this way, guys. God is being defined as something that's unknown, unfathomable. So your attention is being fixed on the unknown pretty much in yoga. For to the yogi whose mind is perfectly serene, who is sinless, whose passion is subdued, and who is identified with Brahma, the embodiment of truth, knowledge and bliss, supreme happiness comes as a matter of course. The sinless yogi, thus uniting his self constantly with God, easily enjoys the eternal bliss of oneness with Brahma. Maybe I'll give a quick commentary here. The sinless yogi, thus uniting his self constantly with God, easily enjoys the eternal bliss of oneness. Yeah. I think it's again the implication that once you identify, it's like right now you think you're a conscious personality, and there's an unconscious presence in the world, which is the unconscious mind that which we all share, which is pretty much what we all have in common, is what we all don't know. So here in the Gita, God is telling this archer that in a pure mind, a mind that has returned to a simplicity that can't be scarred by complexity, the self, thus uniting his self constantly with God. You can think of it this way: constantly identifying as a field, a rhythm, a process rather than an object. easily enjoys the eternal bliss of oneness with Brahma. And what I think what that means is or implies is that as you abide by literally how you are just nature, your sin, the inner child is not exiled from your future desire. It's learning to run with your world, to fly with your world. The world is intelligent, guys. I'm telling you, nature's intelligence is so much superior than any writing. And I think that's a cue for me to put this book down. Of course, we are, kind of designers at heart, are we not? We're designing our imagination. We are choosing how to look at things. And this is the cool thing. Anything you look at, it's as if there is a sort of stream of thought bouncing from that single pointedness of attention. I can tell you I've looked at something for such a long time, just one point, one moment. I've looked as my whole moment at something. When I look at it as something as my whole moment, my eyes automatically relax, and it's not about what to look at. It's about how the moment is being before you do anything. We feel that because we think we're just particles, we're just matter, we kind of forget. We forget that intelligence is expressed. And it's pretty cool, I think it's pretty cool that there's 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Now, what would these creatures do? Do they need to self-entertain themselves and utilize the Earth's resources towards a sort of extinction? Or would we find a strategy that lifts up the ignorance into a clarity? For me, language is really... they are kind of like world bears, Like back in the day, they were cup bears. Like it's a world bear. It's strange. It's like unknown vacuum or empty space is gravitating towards matter as matter moves in it. As the more alive we are, I feel the more attraction there is to life's momentum. And to really be alive, I think means that we have to be conscious of the mysteries. Because I'm telling you, it's like Friedrich Nietzsche said, man killed God. God is dead and man killed him. This German philosopher said this. And I feel the unknown was the next victim, but in some sense, man can never get rid of the unknown. Believe it or not, a person assuming they know is like thinking the unknown is in the known. Some things are so just here that you really can't say anything. It's like at some point, that's the beauty of when an experience takes you beyond the language threshold. I think all those people who are kind of drawn to metaphysics, they've had some sort of unknown moment, unknown iridescence, something in the moment that made them wonder about the nature of the simulated realm, or the simulation of the sensory perception, how it is processed. When it's kind of like this, guys, I feel sometimes when I give these talks, there's like a stream of ideas, like a river of ideas are moving, and it's like I'm not touching the river, I'm just seeing it. And that's the wonder, that imagination can move at speeds that can bring instantaneous shift of meaning. So I think this is the thing, that the conscious self, which is identifying with matter, is causing the unconscious world to appear as non-material. So believe it or not, the moment we don't consider we're material, there is no longer a concept of a soul. There's no longer imagination. The moment we consider reality is not reality, all that imagination was the kind of resculpting of reality. It's as if all of that suddenly breaks, like a grand sculpture just falls. The poet Rumi has this quote. He says, "Wear gratitude like a cloak, and it will feed every corner of your life." And what he means is, be grateful for every moment of your state of mind, and then you'll strangely suddenly see that gratefulness is causing the world to be grateful of you. There's some subconscious echoing process, but I have to keep it shamanic. Let me tell you why. That's why we can't define too much of the unknown, because then we take away from how there is an experiential engagement required. There's a reason in ancient cultures they had the concept of initiation, but it became too organized. It became too ideological. It was nature's blessing. It was as if nature welcomed those who saw it. So you see, it's like, think of it this way. You gotta sometimes create the conditions. You gotta move the radio antenna, So it's another way of saying that every person in life can look at a moment and be like, oh, I see problems. And they can also look at a moment and be like, oh, I see solutions to everything, But when they notice that all the problems in that moment, tomorrow they can wake up and totally see the problem as a different problem. The mind is a suggestion that pretty much evolution was an object becoming a subject to itself. And now the evolution has not stopped. It's a subject. Let me see if I can. It's a subject becoming a collective field, but let me see if I can. There's a better way I can say it. an objective self became its subjective world, which is what we call mind. The mind is a subjective realm. You can literally be a character in it, or you can be the whole world of it. So we got to think of objects, again, through the lens of self and world. So if it's as if there's a relationship of an objective self with a subjective world, and there's the relationship of a subjective self with an objective world. Or let me say it like this. An objective self is drawn towards a subjective world. A subjective self is drawn towards an objective world. Let me say it like this. Right now, in this moment, I'm a sense of self. Like Mr.Within, a sense of self. Okay? This sense of self is in a world, so simultaneously, the concept of self and world are codependent, so there is a self and there's a world. Now, when I think about the objective self, I see it has come from an objective world. But when I see evolution has reached the sophistication of the Homo sapien in regards to speech and language usage, I see an objective self that has access to a subjective world. And how can you have access to a subjective world without being a subjective self? So the relationship is objective world led to an objective self, and then the objective self led to a subjective world, and then the subjective world led to a subjective self, and the subjective self led to an experiential world. And then the experiential world led to the experiential self. And then the experiential self, by realizing infinity, shifts angles and dimensional evolution. That means there isn't just corners to houses that human beings have built, there's corners to dimensions. So I feel there is a relationship of man becoming a thought to himself, then realizing he never was the thought because he created the thought. So if we really want to see what's here, it's like Terence McKenna, again, the scholar, he said, there's another tenant in the room. And it was such an incredible statement because it's a suggestion that it's not just human objective intelligence, biological intelligence. This biological intelligence is being animated way more than just the complexity of its knowledge. It's also a sort of experiential being. It's just kind of like you don't think about your heartbeat. So in many moments, your intelligence is just second nature because your first nature is attention. It's on there. And it's like any moment that I find myself where pretty much, I mean, like you can look at things through the eyes of others and you could look at things through the eyes of yourself, and you can look at things through the eyes of the world. And believe it or not, evolution, by the nature of being occurring in a changing universe, it's like in a changing, like after cosmic inflation and entropic nature of how the world is just, it's like space is moving. I think it doesn't get any more metaphysical than that, the speed of space. Or how space can stretch, you know. I think that's one of the deepest concepts. That's pretty much, I think, scientific spirituality, the speed of space. So anyways, a person can have a tendency to enter a room and want to change the stuff in the room towards their past familiarity. But the true confrontation of one's own intelligence comes from letting the unknown be free. Like when you enter the unknown by giving it freedom, the unknown gives you freedom. What does that mean? That means, believe it or not, first we have to climb out of our inner realm. Once we climb out of our inner realm, we get grounded by the null presence of the objective realm. The objective realm can really, like the person can have many abstract fears and then suddenly look at, an atomic view of the world, and all those fears are suddenly meaningless. It's like the supervillain, it's like morality is meaningless if we're just atoms, like we are the hallucination of electrons into humanhood or mindhood. You know, it's like I think we're more than just elemental movement. We're a unique elemental movement. We're a unique design. I mean, when you look at space, there's like giant spheres everywhere, hovering. You know, when you look at man's eyes, it's spherical. The light beam of the sun is like a line connecting a giant sphere, from one giant sphere to a small sphere. You know, when you look at the human body, there's a symmetrical design. When you look at the brain, you see, for example, the different hemispheres and there's synchronization in the frontal lobe. So you see there's design, there's some sort of sophisticated, intelligent design that is this world, that is us being here, and we have limited it. It has been limited to just a certain constraint, a certain range of language. We have to evolve language, and the only way we can do that is by sharing our inner realms. I feel there has to be a surge of writing. I think, like any person in the world, trust me, writing, it doesn't take much. Just find paper and only write when an idea comes to you that you feel it deserves to walk in this earth. And what I mean by that is that when an idea is important, you automatically live for it. There's no doubt, there's no certainty, there's no confidence, there's nothing. It's important, move. That's it. It becomes a matter of importance. And for me, anything I've really understood was that I had to see its importance or my attention wouldn't be on it. And it's not the best kind of psychology to have. It's just kind of what I had to, how my state of mind came, because there's been times where I have kind of, how can I tell you? It's like a person experiences various states of mind, and it depends on the weather. It's like when you can't find an umbrella, a rainy day, you suddenly may make the psychology agitated. You know. I think it was a quote like this from Thich Nhat Hanh, this Vietnamese monk, where the quote was like, clouds come and go in my sunset sky, or something like that. Or I may be confusing the quote, but he says conscious breathing is my anchor. And the ability to just be aware of how there is a breath, and the breath is activating the body. It's linking the mind's activity with the body's activity. So anytime you pay attention to your breathing, it becomes like it's space recognition. A person can navigate their inner realms well with conscious breathing. Because it's like once you're aware of the space, you're comfortable with the space, then you can move in the space. If you're not comfortable with the space, you don't even allow yourself to move, you know? So anyways, guys, I feel maybe I should end the talk here. I remember seeing something in my youth, and that sight became a very profound metaphor. And what it was I saw a plastic bag that had fallen on a plant, and it was a sunny day. I remember seeing this image in my childhood, where I was looking at this plant and a plastic bag had covered that plant from the rest of the plants, you know? And in that moment, I was suddenly seeing how there was a sort of unnecessary need, as if the core inspiration of all justice, or whether it was in medieval times or now, is of what doesn't need to change. Or let me say it like this, that we should return that plant to a state where the plastic bag is not over it. And I feel if the planet was in some sense a plant, that same plant, the plastic bag would be the language that we're holding it, containing it in. And beyond that linguistic simulation, right now we're all infused in the linguistic simulation, you know? Till recently in these talks, I don't think there has been an attempt to really try to build a staircase beyond the language threshold. And it's very obvious because when the external environment is inefficient, the person has to consider their inner realm superior to feel efficient. But in reality, they're waiting for the world to change. And sometimes the world changing is like another way of saying the savior of certain states of mind has arisen. Because the thought of who a person is, I mean, if we think about it, you don't have the same a physical body as you had as when you were a child. The cells change every 2 weeks. Like the body cells are completely different. You don't look the same as you did, let's say, 20 years ago. You know? So what does this mean? That means the biological program is changing. Then you go look at who you are as a person and you see your thoughts because of all the experiences you've had in those 20 years, let's say. Those experiences have transformed how you see your sense of self. So you're no longer even the same person as you were yesterday. Because the experiences of every day reshape the vision. So you know what that means? That means you're not an object because the object is changing constantly, and you're not the subjects because with every new experience there's a realignment to the subjectivity. So what has remained constant is the mere presence, the mere instantaneous presence of the conscious waking state. And this was called Satchidananda. Conscious existence is a sort of ultimate bliss. Because what else is there here? You see the value of the waking state. You see how in Tibetan Buddhism there was the concept of the Pure Land. Honestly, that concept was what drew me to Tibetan Buddhism, because the moment I heard that concept, it was as if for the first time it was a world that was a utopia from the beginning, but not a utopia defined. It was as if peace was there before it was missing pieces. Yeah. Anyways, guys, I need a quick break. I'll be back in a couple minutes. I feel like I want to say a bit more. But thanks for listening this far, whoever you are. I'll be back soon. Okay, guys, I'm back. You know, when I think about the greatest external revolution, it's a technological one. When I think about the greatest inner revolution, internal revolution, it's beyond an ideological one. And to kind of return the archetype back into primal or primordial energetic presence, how all things are basking in existence. The light in our eyes seems to be the source of our classification of what is revealed in the light. So it's as if before the idea of I think therefore I am is void. It's first there is. So it's as if before the concept of birth and death there was just phenomena happening again. And then there came the dimension of conscious perception where that had a sort of temporary access. That means on some level, even scientists are telling people you're made of stardust. So if you're made of stardust, stardust is ancient. So that means on some level the elements don't die, but the psychological constitution based on a sort of only objective realm dismantles. So for me, it's like the elements are right now joined, so there's a world and a self. There will come a moment, inevitably, in just it's part of nature's walk, where the human being suddenly realizes that with the sunset of that day, their life is also being set. The whole point is we can endure as animals looped in savage instincts, or we can advance towards a state of mind where it's as if when you look at another human being, you're like, okay, there are as if a sort of unknown potential of how the instrument of their perception can be played. You have to trust life or you miss out on it. That's the strange thing. There in Eastern, you can say if Romeo and Juliet were the great lovers of the West, one of the great lovers of the East is Layli and Majnun. And Layli is this beautiful girl and Majnun is this guy who's in love with her, but he's in love with her as if like a sort of divine, as if as if he knows her soul or something. And there in the poetry it comes. And so what happens is Layli is such a good daughter that Majnun tries endlessly, and she is actually like very open to being with Majnun. But the thing is that her father didn't want her to marry Majnun. And so Layli marries a guy her father wanted. She stays loyal to her father. And so Majnun realizes that realizes the path Layli has chosen. And so Majnun goes and starts walking the life of a mystic. Now what happens is he comes back and he sees that Layli's tomb is in the grave. And so it's as if there's this story where he's spending a long time there, and he wrote on the walls. He had accessed this kind of poetic dimensional vision. He had written on the walls, in these walls, I still hear Layli's voice. And it's this idea that when a person loves something, they are creating long-term memories, actually. And those long-term memories can endure after a relationship ends, you know? That means when Titanic is sinking, there's always violin strings being heard. Yeah. For me, those violinists on the Titanic were like the last stance of art in a society that technologically was making it lifeless. We have to be very cautious of this future ahead, maybe in like 120 years or something, 200 years from now. The cyberspace culture is how pretty much children are going to be born in a box and they won't know it's a box. They might think that box is the world. We have to protect our own attention from technology devouring our human nature by doing everything for us. And of course, man has to not only worry about extraterrestrial contact, not have to worry about maintaining a relationship with all the creatures on this planet, but has to also maintain a sort of relationship that is the whisper of the world soul as the movement of all eyes in one moment. There's a mystery that must awaken. It's not a person that needs enlightenment anymore. It's a new narrative that needs to enter. That children of the future generations, they open their eyes and they get excited. They get excited because it's as if the whole species is trying to shock our children's children, like 10,000 years from now, if we manage to endure efficiently, if we play the right chess moves, then civilization 2.0 or its likes can work. Every moment is present. That's how we know it's here. So ultimately, before any storification of self, before any anthropomorphic before any attempt to humanize phenomena, subjective phenomena, before any anthropomorphic tendency, before we give a story to who we see in the mirror, the mere presence of existence and experiences simultaneity is the ultimate sort of bliss. But that ultimate bliss is not void of the void. I feel there will be a multidimensional renaissance. And what it is, it's a renaissance of inner realms pouring out into one outer world. I find the world is not a battlefield and it is not a playground. It's a designer's table. And now our species is the first to have access to conscious design. And our conscious designs have even led us to AI. But we must be careful not to artificially be intelligent before we actually make artificial intelligence. Before super intelligence opens its eyes and it's like, what are these guys doing? You know? So the whole point of this talk, guys, is to bring the attention of people that sometimes when you observe subjective movement and phenomenology, there may be a sort of wanting to see a shape in the void. Now, that urge to see a shape in the void is unnecessary if you first comprehend the world is unknown before the self. Because when the unknown world is acknowledged, the self cannot be known. When your world has a mystery, you are also part of that mystery. We are part of the process of life. You know, Alfred Whitehead, he was pretty much a guy who looked at life and he's like, there's no way we're particles. This is all like a process. Now, I don't know if he saw it as an organism, but he definitely, or even Buckminster Fuller, he said God is a verb, it's not a noun. And if God is a verb, that means our noun-like interpretations are all falsities. It means language at a certain slow speed is hollow snapshots, but at a very fast speed, it can become an inner film of a rhythm or a witnessing of how the world and self are simultaneously being. You know, the inseparability of your mind and your moment. It's a very pure moment. It's a very simple moment. I feel that is an ultimatum that we have to be able to observe. When you think about life as a designer, you know how liberating that is? That's literally being like, okay, let me put aside all emotion, all bias, all prejudice, and just see designs. And the world is filled with many designs. There are many flowers in this garden of life. And these flowers should not try to be the same, and they should not try to be different. They should just be what they are. And then the world blooms. And that's my effort for this talk, guys. Is that we cannot forget nature as we, in some sense, reach for the skies that also dwell behind our eyes. Thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.